When they delivered that eviction paperwork, I remained silent. Instead, I placed the 1923 water rights document on the table and observed as 35 luxury homes transformed into waterfront real estate. While I served overseas in Afghanistan, the Willowbrook Estates HOA believed they could appropriate my grandfather's property. These self-important officials constructed their ideal suburban community on unlawfully seized territory, complete with tennis-attired busybodies conducting patrols in electric carts. What they failed to realize was my background as an Army Corps engineer. That modest earthen dam on my land had been positioned there for 45 years, awaiting someone foolish enough to construct housing below it. Their arrogance was remarkable until the release gates activated and their premium neighborhood experienced its initial encounter with organic flood patterns. This entire situation was going to provide immense satisfaction. What location are you viewing from? Leave your comment below, as you're about to observe the most spectacular HOA defeat involving federal water legislation and natural forces. Allow me to present Jake Morrison. That would be me. I'm 34 years of age, an Army Corps of Engineers specialist, and the third-generation proprietor of 47 acres of valuable Texas property situated just beyond Austin's limits. My grandfather, whom our family knew as Pops, acquired this land back in 1955 during the era when Austin remained a quiet university town, where traditional barbecue establishments outnumbered technology corporations by approximately 1,000 to 1. Pops embodied the philosophy of proper land stewardship and caring for those who lived nearby. In 1978, he constructed a modest earth dam on our acreage. Nothing elaborate, simply solid engineering intended to capture rainfall for livestock and assist our downstream community members during arid periods. The Army Corps of Engineers provided assistance with the structural design. Pops consistently maintained that eventually the rear 40 acres would possess significant value, though presently it consisted merely of picturesque undulating terrain where we grazed cattle and where I acquired hunting skills. Then my 2 military deployments to Afghanistan occurred, where I concentrated on water resource administration and infrastructure development. It appears that constructing water wells and controlling water distribution in combat zones provides valuable education regarding the preciousness of uncontaminated water and the rapidity with which conflicts arise over its control. During my second overseas assignment, Pops died. The land transferred into a trust administered by my well-intentioned yet overwhelmed sister Sarah, who resides in California and possesses approximately as much knowledge about Texas property legislation as I possess about wave riding. She employed a regional property administration firm named Lanier Land Services to manage the taxation and property care. The property assessments received automatic payment. However, here's the critical detail. Sarah never actually examined the tax valuation. Significant error. Introduce our antagonist, Margaret Maggie Thornwell, 52 years of age, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA, and the variety of individual who operates a white BMW X7 while treating tennis attire as professional wardrobe. Maggie possesses that specific variety of passive-aggressive charm that Southern women master around 45 years of age, the type where they'll display a smile during backstabbing activities and somehow present it as benevolent action. Maggie's spouse is City Councilman Rick Thornwell, which provides complete understanding of her operational methods. She maintains a standing for community beautification programs, which essentially means compelling departure of anyone failing to match her suburban perfection vision. Her costly fragrance cannot entirely conceal the cigarette smoke scent and entitlement aura that accompanies her presence like an atmospheric cloud that I returned from military service in August 2023, finally prepared to dedicate substantial time to Pop's property. I traveled down that recognizable gravel pathway, beyond the ancient oak where I'd etched my name during childhood, anticipating the identical rolling meadows and that small earth dam glistening under the Texas sunlight. Instead, I discovered construction teams, cement vehicles, and surveying markers distributed across my rear 40 acres like a suburban occupation. The gravel sound beneath my footwear felt altered somehow, containing more anger. I could perceive the airborne particles and my escalating rage as I approached the construction supervisor. "My apologies, friend," he stated, appearing completely unapologetic. "We possess permits and all necessary documentation. This represents Willowbrook Estates property currently. I contacted law enforcement. Officer Martinez arrived and clarified with evident unease that the HOA had submitted an adverse possession claim during my overseas service. Apparently, when property remains actively in use for specific durations, and if improvement evidence exists, ownership claims sometimes succeed. It's antiquated legislation designed to prevent perpetually vacant land, though it's evolved into a preferred instrument of developers and HOAs pursuing territorial expansion. That moment brought Maggie's appearance, arriving in her compact golf cart resembling a suburban military commander. Her vocal tone possessed that sugary sweetness that immediately triggered wallet-checking instincts. "Your family deserted this property, dear," she announced, smiling as though performing charitable work. "We're simply utilizing it productively for community benefit." However, here's what genuinely inflamed my anger. I discovered her construction teams had redirected the small waterway feeding Pop's dam. The water elevation decreased daily, along with 45 years of meticulous water administration that had supported our community through droughts, floods, and all intermediate conditions. Standing there observing the declining water level, Maggie's departing comment resonated in my thoughts. "You should have maintained closer proximity to home, military man." That moment crystallized my understanding. This transcended mere land disputes. This was warfare. I hired the initial attorney I could locate. Significant mistake. This individual quoted me $85,000 merely to contest the zoning modification. Apparently, during my national service, Maggie's spouse Rick had expedited an emergency zoning alteration. My family's property transitioned from agricultural pre-validation to residential development classification faster than pronouncing conflict of interest. However, my Army Corps training proved advantageous here. While that excessively expensive lawyer shuffled documents and accumulated billing hours, I was examining county records like I was searching for explosive devices. Similar to Afghanistan, the crucial information resided in specific details. I located Pop's original 1978 dam construction authorizations, and they were magnificent. You see, Pops didn't merely construct that dam independently. He collaborated directly with the Army Corps of Engineers for flood management and watershed administration. That established federal authority. Here's your initial educational point. Any dam constructed with federal guidance creates federal jurisdiction that local HOAs cannot supersede. Absolutely. The metallic adrenaline sensation contacted my taste receptors as I comprehended my discovery. This no longer represented merely a property disagreement. It had become a federal matter. However, circumstances improved further. While photocopying permits at the courthouse, I encountered a 1923 water rights document concealed within old records. My great-grandfather had purchased senior water privileges to the complete Willow Creek watershed. These privileges preceded the city, the county's municipal water infrastructure, and every single one of those luxury homes occupying my property. They weren't merely appropriating my land. They were stealing my water resources. Meanwhile, Maggie performed the victim role actively. She arranged an emergency HOA assembly regarding the hazardous dam structure, including a local news team she'd evidently contacted beforehand. I observed her on evening broadcasts, positioned before her impeccably maintained lawn, discussing children's welfare and community security. "We're simply concerned regarding our children's well-being," she stated, touching tissues to her eyes. "That dam appears prepared to collapse, and we have families residing directly downstream." The amusing aspect about local news: they appreciate compelling stories, though they're not consistently excellent with subsequent investigation. If they'd troubled to verify, they would have discovered that my dam had successfully passed its most recent safety examination. However, Maggie hadn't finished. She posted on the Nextdoor application, that digital neighborhood surveillance platform where HOA presidents demonstrate their trivial authority. Her post cautioned about aggressive property conflicts and unstable persons in the vicinity. She never specified my identity, though she didn't need to. In a community that compact, everyone understood exactly her reference target. The diesel combustion scent mixed with cedar pollen permeated the August atmosphere as I stood on my front porch each evening observing their construction teams operating double shifts. They were competing to complete those residences before I could obtain any legal prohibition. Each evening, I tallied new foundation formations. Each evening, the water elevation in Pop's Dam decreased another inch. That prompted me to contact my former Army colleague Tony Riggs, who currently works for the EPA Enforcement Division. 20 minutes conversing with Tony provided more environmental law education than 3 hours with that costly attorney. Jake, Tony stated, if they're redirecting a natural waterway without federal authorizations, that constitutes a Clean Water Act violation. And if your dam possesses federal jurisdiction, he didn't require sentence completion that I commenced documenting everything. Trail cameras around property boundaries, timestamped photography of every water redirection, flow measurements at 3 distinct creek locations. My sister Sarah telephoned from California, pleading with me to simply accept monetary compensation and depart. However, this no longer concerned money. It concerned the gravel sound beneath construction footwear that possessed no legitimate business on my property. It concerned Maggie's heel sounds clicking across courthouse marble during zoning proceedings that should never have occurred. It concerned the bitter courthouse coffee flavor during research sessions that exposed this corruption's depth. However, primarily, it concerned that dam. Pops constructed it to assist the community during dry periods. For 45 years, it had provided life resources for our downstream community members. Maggie's team was converting it into decorative water features for luxury homes. Here's the reality about Texas water rights. They precede oil rights, mineral rights, and they're considerably more difficult to appropriate. However, you must understand proper defensive methods. Standing there observing another cement truck travel past my kitchen window, I achieved important realization. This wouldn't be decided in a courtroom with costly lawyers and legal documents. This would be decided through engineering. Maggie decided to escalate tensions. She organized what she termed a neighborhood safety patrol. 3 HOA board members wearing matching polo shirts who stationed themselves at my property entrance like a suburban security checkpoint. They photographed every visitor, documented license plates, and submitted reports to the sheriff regarding suspicious activities. The harassment campaign represented textbook intimidation tactics, loud music complaints when I operated my radio during farm operations, unsightly structure citations for my perfectly functional farmhouse that had existed since 1962, environmental hazard reports about my septic system that had successfully passed inspection merely 6 months previously. However, the genuine insult arrived when Rick utilized his city council position to order a wellness evaluation on me through veteran services. Apparently, I represented a troubled veteran who might be experiencing readjustment difficulties. The social worker who appeared was apologetic yet comprehensive. She had to complete checklist items on her clipboard while Maggie observed from her golf cart, like she was supervising a military examination. That initiated the coordinated bureaucratic assault. Building inspector, fire marshal, health department, and animal control all appeared on the identical day like a regulatory tactical team. Each one identified minor violations requiring costly corrections. The building inspector, who happened to be Rick's drinking companion, declared that my front porch required $8,000 in foundation repairs that I recognized the pressure tactic immediately. It's the identical strategy they employ in war zones to pressure local officials. Overwhelm them with bureaucracy until they surrender and cooperate. However, 2 parties can participate in that strategy. While they were submerging me in paperwork, I was making my own telephone contacts. Tony Riggs at the EPA was extremely interested to discover that Maggie's HOA had never submitted the required wetlands assessment before redirecting Willow Creek. Apparently, any development that redirects natural waterways requires federal environmental authorization, even on private property. And the financial penalties for violations commence at $50,000 per day. The fresh concrete curing scent in the summer heat reminded me each morning that I was depleting available time. However, my research was yielding results in ways Maggie never anticipated. I discovered that their entire development had been constructed in what the Army Corps classified as a 100-year floodplain. Insurance corporations had initially refused coverage until the HOA provided a flood mitigation strategy. Their solution: permanently redirect Willow Creek away from the new residences and allow it to flood my property instead. Here's your second educational point. Insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not merely civil ones. When developers falsify information about flood risks to obtain coverage, that's federal mail fraud. The deeper I investigated, the more I realized this wasn't Maggie's initial operation. Her previous HOA in Houston had paid a $2.3 million EPA fine for an identical creek diversion scheme. She'd departed town just ahead of federal prosecutors and established operations here in Austin, seeking new victims. Meanwhile, Maggie was circulating rumors about my mental health and violent tendencies. She hired a private investigator to uncover damaging information on my military service and organized a petition demanding the city condemn my property as a public nuisance. "We have children participating in these neighborhoods," she told the local newspaper. "We cannot have unstable individuals threatening our safety." However, while she was actively performing the victim role, I was building alliances. I connected with other HOA victims through online forums and discovered a pattern. Maggie's HOA had absorbed 6 smaller properties through similar tactics over the past 3 years. Each time, the story was identical: pressure, harassment, bureaucratic warfare, and mysterious zoning changes that consistently seemed to benefit Rick's construction company. That I partnered with my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chun, whose family garden had withered since the creek diversion. I met Miguel Santos, whose family farm had been rezoned out of existence by Rick Thornwell 2 years earlier. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic land acquisition that had been ongoing for years. The heavy machinery vibration through my farmhouse floorboards became a daily reminder of my fighting purpose. Every morning, I observed cement trucks travel past my kitchen window. Every evening, I documented the water theft that was gradually destroying Pop's Dam. However, I was also preparing. I installed water flow meters at the dam outlet and creek diversion points. I calculated the exact volume of water being stolen: 1,200 gallons per day, worth $47,000 annually in agricultural water rights. The gritty sand texture between my fingers as I tested creek bed sediment told the story better than any lawyer could. This wasn't just theft, it was environmental destruction on a massive scale. And then I received the certified letter. The city was planning to seize my property through eminent domain for public safety. The hearing was scheduled in just 2 weeks. Maggie's quote in the newspaper made her strategy crystal clear: "Sometimes you have to protect the community from itself." However, as I stood at my bedroom window that night observing storm clouds gather on the horizon, I realized something important. Those weren't just rain clouds building up, they were opportunity. Maggie went nuclear. Rick fast-tracked an eminent domain hearing scheduled for just 2 weeks out, and suddenly the HOA was offering me $180,000 for property assessed at $890,000. The message was clear: take the lowball offer or lose everything. The local newspaper ran a hit piece that made me sound like some variety of domestic terrorist. "Troubled Veteran Blocks Community Progress" was the headline, complete with a photograph that somehow made my farmhouse look like a drug den and me look like I hadn't slept in weeks. However, Maggie's masterstroke was the photo opportunity. She staged it perfectly: 20 concerned mothers holding children near my property line, with a professional photographer capturing their worried faces while my farmhouse loomed menacingly in the background. The social media post went viral with the hashtag #ProtectOurKids. "Our children deserve safe neighborhoods," she told the Channel 7 News crew. "Not whatever issues he brought back from war." You know what? She was right about one thing. I did bring something back from war. I brought back the ability to recognize when someone's trying to steamroll you with propaganda and the engineering skills to do something about it. Tony Riggs called with information that changed everything. The EPA had already opened a federal investigation into Willow Creek diversions based on my initial complaint. However, here's the crucial part. Maggie's previous HOA in Houston faced that $2.3 million fine for the exact same scheme. Federal environmental crimes follow individuals even when they move to new jurisdictions. While Maggie was playing the victim on social media, I was discovering that her entire financial house of cards was built on fraud. The HOA's construction loans were tied to inflated property values, and the banks had required guaranteed water access for loan approval. If those water rights reverted back to me, their rightful owner, the entire development would become financially underwater. The taste of bitter irony wasn't lost on me. They'd stolen my water to make their land valuable. and now their own greed was going to drown them. Maggie's panic was starting to show. She offered me $400,000 cash, no questions asked, 48-hour deadline. When I refused, she flew to California to approach my sister Sarah with some sob story about her brother's mental health issues. That backfired spectacularly. The dam was never about our family's profit. It was about community service, helping downstream neighbors survive droughts and managing floods to protect everyone in the watershed. Reading those journals, I realized what Maggie had really stolen. It wasn't just land or water. It was 45 years of community cooperation that my grandfather had built one neighbor at a time. That MY engineering analysis confirmed what I'd suspected. Maggie's creek diversion was creating an upstream flooding hazard. During heavy rains, the redirected water would back up into residential areas. The original creek bed had provided natural flood control for the entire watershed, and my spillway system was the only way to safely manage seasonal flooding. The timeline pressure was crushing. September rains were predicted to be the heaviest in 7 years. If I waited for the legal system to grind through appeals and federal investigations, natural flooding would happen anyway, potentially causing real property damage. However, if I acted now, I could control the timing and intensity. A controlled spillway release would demonstrate natural flood patterns without endangering anyone, while proving that the HOA development violated federal environmental law. Standing at those spillway controls at sunset, holding Pop's journal, the moral clarity hit me like a lightning bolt. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring the natural order that had sustained this community for generations. Maggie had systematically destroyed the local farming community. Miguel Santos lost his family's century-old farm. Mrs. Chin's ancestral garden withered without creek water. 3 other families were forced to sell generational properties to Rick's eminent domain schemes. However, the federal environmental investigators were scheduled to visit next month. Perfect timing. If I could demonstrate natural flood patterns before their inspection, it would prove the HOA development violated multiple federal laws. The musty smell of old hydraulic fluid in the dam control mechanisms reminded me that this equipment was built to last. Pops had designed it for exactly this moment, when someone would need to stand up for the creek and the community that depended on it. As storm clouds gathered on the horizon, I made the decision that would change everything. Time to honor Pop's legacy and open those gates. You don't just open a dam without a plan. This wasn't revenge. It was a military operation with legal cover, environmental justification, and community support. First, I assembled my team. Amanda Cross coordinated the legal strategy, filing additional federal complaints to ensure maximum media attention when the spillway opened. Tony Riggs provided federal cover, guaranteeing that EPA investigators would witness what he called our natural flooding demonstration. Miguel Santos documented 40 years of downstream agricultural damage, providing historical testimony about seasonal flooding patterns that proved the creek diversion was destroying generational farming operations. Mrs. Chin offered her property as a staging area and brought credibility as the community's most respected longtime resident. Amanda's legal strategy was brilliant. She filed an emergency agricultural water rights restoration motion, arguing that the dam covenant legally required me to maintain seasonal flooding for downstream agriculture. We weren't breaking the law, we were following it. Here's a crucial knowledge nugget. Agricultural water rights often supersede residential development rights, especially when you have historical documentation proving prior use. The key is having ironclad paperwork that predates any development claims. My technical preparation was pure Army Corps engineering. I created detailed spillway operation plans with precise calculations, controlled release starting at 6 a.m., gradual increase over 4 hours, peak flow at 10 a.m. The water volume was calculated to demonstrate natural flooding patterns without causing structural damage to anything except Maggie's illegal concrete barriers. Safety was paramount. I posted warning signs 24 hours in advance and personally notified the volunteer fire department. This wasn't some reckless flood. It was a carefully controlled demonstration of how water naturally wanted to flow. Amanda contacted environmental reporters from the Austin American-Statesman and local TV stations. Miguel arranged for community members to witness the agricultural water restoration. The strategy was simple. Control the narrative before Maggie could spin it as dangerous veteran terrorizes neighborhood. Our intelligence network was straight out of a spy novel. Mrs. Chun monitored HOA activity through the neighborhood gossip network. Never underestimate little old ladies with time on their hands. The local diner waitress, who happened to be Miguel's cousin, reported on city council closed-door meetings. My army buddy at Fort Hood provided surveillance drone support for legal documentation. While I was rebuilding spillway controls with modern hydraulic systems, Amanda was waging financial warfare. She contacted insurance companies with evidence of fraudulent applications, arranged for banking regulators to review construction loan documentation, and prepared whistleblower complaints about Rick's conflicts of interest. The beauty was in the timing coordination. Weather Service confirmed heavy rains in 72 hours. Amanda scheduled federal environmental inspection for the same week. Miguel arranged for the agricultural extension agent to document downstream benefits. A perfect storm of natural weather, federal oversight, and community support, all converging at exactly the right moment. However, I knew Maggie's psychology. She always escalated when pressured. So I prepared for her predictable responses. Emergency HOA meeting, media smear campaign, probably a restraining order filed through her corrupt judge friend. Amanda drafted preemptive legal responses to each expected attack. The evidence preservation was crucial. I compiled comprehensive photo documentation of the current creek diversion, recorded video testimony from affected farmers and neighbors, and gathered historical photographs showing original creek bed and seasonal flooding patterns. Amanda secured everything in federal court filings for legal protection. Safety protocols included coordination with the volunteer fire department, communication with downstream residents, and detailed notices posted in English and Spanish. I even created an evacuation plan we wouldn't need, just to demonstrate responsible management. The economic warfare was Amanda's specialty. She tipped off state banking regulators about construction loan irregularities, contacted the Texas Attorney General about insurance fraud evidence, and prepared a civil RICO lawsuit alleging a pattern of racketeering. Here's another knowledge nugget. Coordinated regulatory pressure often forces settlement faster than individual lawsuits. When multiple agencies investigate simultaneously, defendants can't fight on all fronts. The smell of WD-40 and machine oil filled the evening air as I serviced all dam equipment and tested spillway gates under minimal flow. Everything worked perfectly. Pops had built this system to last that I stocked the farmhouse with supplies for a potential siege, knowing Maggie would try everything to stop me. Amanda filed protective court orders preventing interference with lawful dam operations. We established secure communications using military-grade encrypted radio to AS. I stood at those controls for the final equipment check. Watching storm clouds build on the horizon, everything felt aligned. Weather forecast confirmed heavy rains in 48 hours. Federal investigators would arrive in 36 hours. Maggie was scheduled for her morning show appearance in 24 hours, probably planning another attack on my character. The timing was perfect. Dawn tomorrow would bring justice and 45 years of stolen water back to where it belonged. Maggie's desperation reached new levels when she hired private security to patrol my property perimeter. These weren't just rent-a-cops with flashlights. These were the same tactical gear wannabes who work private military contracts and think HOA disputes are combat zones. My trail cameras caught them red-handed trying to sabotage the spillway control mechanisms at 2 a.m. One genius was caught on video attempting to jam concrete mix into the hydraulic lines while his buddy served as lookout. Tony Riggs had tipped off the sheriff's department, and Deputy Rodriguez was waiting in the shadows when they made their move. The arrest was beautiful. Mr. Tactical Vest claimed they were protecting community infrastructure from an unstable individual. But it's hard to explain why you're carrying a bag of quick-set concrete at 2 o'clock in the morning. Maggie's media blitz was even more desperate. She appeared on the Austin Morning Show wearing her Sunday best and speaking in that trembling voice politicians use when they want to look like victims. Veterans need mental health support, not weapons, she told the host, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. This man learned to use water as a weapon in Afghanistan, and now he's threatening to wash away children's homes. Rick provided expert testimony as a city engineer about catastrophic dam failure risks, conveniently forgetting to mention that my dam had passed every safety inspection for 45 years. However, while Maggie was playing victim on television, my surveillance training was paying dividends. I documented every sabotage attempt, every illegal entry, every piece of evidence that would later prove criminal conspiracy. Tony revealed that federal investigators had been wiretapping Rick's office phone as part of an ongoing corruption probe. These people were more desperate than I'd realized. The legal assault came next. Rick fast-tracked an emergency restraining order hearing for 6 a.m. the following morning, clearly hoping to catch us off guard. Judge Henry Walsh, Rick's golf buddy who'd received $15,000 in campaign contributions from Rick's construction company, agreed to hear the emergency public safety motion. Amanda discovered the corruption connection and immediately filed for Walsh's recusal, but we knew the fix was in. If they couldn't stop the spillway opening legally, they'd stop it through a corrupt judge. Meanwhile, Maggie organized a neighborhood safety patrol to physically surround my property. 20 HOA residents showed up with folding chairs, coolers, and "Protect Our Kids" signs, planning to livestream the spillway opening as environmental terrorism. The optics were perfect for her narrative: suburban families with children versus dangerous veteran with a dam. However, Miguel Santos had been busy too. He brought 30 farmers and families to support what we called agricultural water restoration. Mrs. Chun organized a counter-demonstration with historical photos showing the creek in its natural state. Amanda arranged for Audubon Society and Sierra Club representatives to attend. Two competing narratives were about to collide: veteran attacks families versus community protects water rights. The technical sabotage escalated when security footage revealed someone had poured concrete mix into the spillway channel overnight, creating a blockage designed to cause actual flooding danger if I opened the gates. This wasn't just harassment. It was attempted murder disguised as vandalism that I worked through the night with a portable jackhammer, clearing the sabotage while documenting every chunk of concrete as evidence. The metallic taste of exhaustion mixed with fury as I realized how far they were willing to go. Rick used his city council emergency powers to declare my property an imminent public hazard, authorizing the fire department to secure the dangerous dam structure. Fire Chief Martinez, one of the few honest officials left in town, privately warned me that this was purely political. "Jake, you've got maybe 6 hours before they force me to intervene," he said. "Make it count." The insurance investigation breakthrough came at the perfect moment. Amanda's fraud reports triggered a state investigation, and the Texas Insurance Commission froze all HOA development insurance policies. Without valid insurance, the construction company faced immediate work stoppage. Financial pressure was finally hitting where it hurt: Maggie and Rick's wallets. Tony moved the EPA inspection up 24 hours due to credible sabotage reports. Federal agents were now en route, arriving at 8 a.m. If the spillway opened during their inspection, it would become federal evidence of proper water management. However, Maggie's final gambit was the cruelest. She contacted Veterans Mental Health Services, claiming I'd made suicide threats and needed an involuntary psychiatric hold. The VA social worker arrived at my farmhouse at 5:30 a.m., just as I was preparing for the spillway operation that I had to convince her I was mentally competent while simultaneously preparing to flood a subdivision. Not exactly a normal Tuesday morning conversation. Sarah called from California, her voice breaking. "I can't lose my brother too. Please, Jake, this isn't what Pops would want." For a moment, I almost cracked. Then I found Pop's final journal entry about standing up to bullies, and my resolve hardened like concrete. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek. At 7:02 a.m., with federal agents watching and the morning sun painting the sky orange, I opened the spillway gates to 25% capacity. The sound was magnificent, not the violent rush of destruction, but the gentle whisper of water returning home. For the first time in 18 months, Willow Creek began flowing in its original bed, exactly where nature intended. Miguel Santos knelt beside the restored creek and cupped the clear water in his weathered hands, tears streaming down his face. "This is the water that fed my grandfather's farm for 60 years, he whispered to Maggie's. Reaction was immediate and predictable. She screamed at the federal agents to arrest the terrorist, her carefully composed morning show demeanor cracking like cheap paint. EPA agent Sarah Kim calmly explained, "Ma'am, this gentleman has the legal right to operate his agricultural flood control system." However, Maggie was live streaming on Facebook, her voice rising to near hysteria. He's flooding our children's homes. This is what happens when we let unstable veterans have weapons. Except the water wasn't flooding anything. It was flowing exactly where it belonged, in the original creek bed that her development had illegally blocked. Local news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the spillway operation live. The Austin American-Statesman reporter was interviewing downstream farmers about their restored water access when Maggie tried to hijack the interview. "This veteran is using military training to attack civilians," she shrieked. The reporter, clearly confused, asked, "Ma'am, the water is flowing in the original creek bed. How exactly is this an attack?"